He's saying you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, then it's good for nothing and you just throw it away. And I believe that's what he's referring to here, that the salt is that commodity, that thing that was very, valuable in the ancient world, that it's the thing that made it not only made food taste better, but it preserved the food. It was the primary way of preserving meat. And so what's the meat? In St. Paul talks about, the meat. Some people aren't ready for the meat. They have to be fed milk, depending on the level of their spiritual development. So we are the custodians and the preservers of the meat, of the real substantial spiritual teachings that actually move a person's soul closer to God realization. So we have to be very careful that we are not only do that, but we're willing to do that, that we're willing to put aside these corrupting influences and speak continually at a higher level, and not go there, and find ways to speak to the inner person and not to their political ear.
And wow, I can't believe you're having this today, because yesterday I was on a phone call with a friend, and someone that I talk to on a regular basis, but like every couple weeks or at least once a month and stuff. And they got really upset with me about some things that are going on politically, and that I didn't agree with them on it. And, I tried to just steer clear of the whole thing and say I didn't want to discuss it, and I didn't really want to argue with anybody, and just stay. And they got really upset with me, and they started telling me how disappointed they were in me, and that I used to be someone they would listen to or had respect for, but they felt like they were losing that because of my beliefs, I guess. And then they went on to tell me that they weren't the only one that felt that way, that there were other people that were really disappointed in me too. And the whole thing just kind of took me by surprise. I called because I was going to share some information about some really neat books I got in the mail. And we didn't even get to that. We were 5 minutes on the phone, and this, and there was nothing I could say. I knew I couldn't, there was no defense of it as far as anything I would have said they would have argued with. And I didn't want to argue with them, but it became real clear to me that, and I've kind of felt this way off and on for maybe the last year or so, that I was cutting ties with them more and more because I just couldn't communicate with them. They just didn't want, I don't know. Yeah. They didn't want to communicate with me, and they didn't want to hear what I had to say. And I don't know.
Was the topic?
Divisions,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Polly.
No, I was just going to say the divisions today go beyond our ability to address at a rational level. It's like you can't have a let me explain kind of a conversation, because that's not where they're talking. There isn't any magic answer from you that will make them see things your way, because they're really down here at some very deeper feeling, and it's not an intellectual thing. Data doesn't help, it turns out, in these conversations. There isn't, I think you were right. The best thing to do is not to allow yourself to get engaged in a debate that neither side can win, because it's not about facts. It's very sad when that happens.
It was very hurtful. I mean, after that, I kind of took the wind out of my sails, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I was going to talk about something else, but I guess,
Uh,
so
yeah.
I said, I guess I'll go. And they said, okay. And they hung up on me. And so that was that. Like,
Jeez.
okay, we're done with that.
Was the
Uh,
topic politics, or what was brought on the problem?
And I've run into this with several different people that are, and all of these people are Catholic, and I'm not trying to pick on them because I'm Catholic too, but, and I have family members that are this way too. Like if you're Catholic, you vote pro-choice, pro-life, regardless. It doesn't, nothing else matters.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to vote for that person, then don't vote. That's what they told me that yesterday. And I was just like, you know, I'm not going to argue that. There's no,
yeah, that it's not, yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's, you can't even discuss it, you know. I mean, it's really sad, and they're very, very adamant about it. And so they just didn't want to, you know, anything to do with me because, you know, then they would say things like, well, you're pro-abortion. And I go, no, I'm not pro-abortion, not at all, you know. But, you know, I have some scruples as to who I'm going to vote for and who I'm not going to based on certain things. And I won't vote just pro-life just because for that, you know.
Right.
If that person, if that's all they're running on or they have. Or, so.
Well, this gets back to the point of where religion is primarily a cultural phenomenon, and mysticism is the element within a religion that transcends that. But as long as you're dealing at the cultural level with religion, there's very little difference between it and politics, because culture is, you know, part and parcel. You know, it's a political thing. So what we've been discovering, and we've known for a long time, and Margot and I have talked about this a lot, is how we have to really avoid political discussion in all of its forms, especially if we're going to be spiritual teachers, because the minute you take a side, you lose half your audience.
Yes, and you don't know you don't know how your words are being received all the time.
Exactly.
You might think you're all in the same club, but
no.
I've made that mistake, and it only had to happen once, and I went, oh, now I get it. This is why you never preach about politics. Just don't know.
Well, how do you answer questions? I mean, I'm not one to preach on that topic or anything. I'm always, I've been the one who gets asked, well, what do you believe, or how do you believe, or are you this or that, you know? And
well, out of the pulpit, if it's just me, then I will cheerfully share what I believe. But speaking as a pastor, I mean, when I had to preach the Sunday after the last election, and my whole congregation was just, I mean, they were beside themselves. And I basically had to tell them the best thing we can do is focus as much positive energy as you can on Washington. I essentially said, pray for Trump. It actually did not go down well. And I have a very progressive congregation. They really didn't want to do that. But I continue to believe it's the only appropriate response, because what else are you going to do? I mean, if you want the country to run by rule of law, you got to accept the results of the election and immediately start to work on the next one. But it's very, These last years have not been fun.
Rough go. It is a rough go, because you don't want to cut someone off who really needs help spiritually.
Exactly.
And so you have to set that aside. I mean, Father Paul would say, I'm never telling anybody who I vote for. Don't ask me. I don't want to talk about it. That was the end of it. Because the person who really needs your help may be socially in a whole nother world, but right now they're at your doorstep. So you can't break that bridge. So
Yep.
And since the so many political issues are no longer rational. I don't know if they ever have been, but they're
not anymore.
Well, I think the last 200 years it's been a little erratic.
Yeah. So we have to deal with them on their own level if we're going to deal with them at all, which is the emotional level. And somebody once told me that emotions are non-negotiable. You can't argue with somebody about how they feel. So
right, they feel how they feel.
Right. With a pro-life person, I try to say something like, I really get that human life is important to you, and I honor that in you. And if I'm talking with somebody who's pro-choice, I try to say something along the lines of, I understand that women have to be in control of their own destiny and their own bodies, and that no one has the right to tell them what to do. And I understand that's how you feel, and I honor that in you. So it's like, and then leave it at that, right?
Quick exit left.
Exit
Yeah.
left. Right, as the case may be.
Enough said.
Yeah. So, as probably most of you here know, that I really, tried my best to enter into that, dialogue, and I just came to the conclusion that you cannot change people's minds, not with logic. And again, it's like, this is an emotional issue, and people, they feel very strongly in a certain way, and their thoughts are lined up to support their emotions, not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Yeah. No,
So
that's true.
And what I finally decided was to take, for instance, there was a sermon by a friend of mine who has a church in North Carolina, and he talked about the Black Lives Matter problem, and he was making good points, but he was making points that were really hard to interpret because everybody is taking it emotionally and not rationally. He was making some strong rational points, and he got such pushback, just extreme pushback. And so I thought, well, what's going on here? Because are people pushing back against the truth, or is it something else? And so I could see the points he was trying to make, but that the way he was trying to make them was just a non-starter and counterproductive and very divisive and easy to misinterpret, and just setting people off so much so that they only got like a minute or two into the sermon and then just turned it off.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So my conclusion was what are the underlying issues here? What in not the political issues, but the spiritual issues, and trying to identify what's the spiritual dynamic underneath the argument. And I think that's how we have to approach it. Like Polly, when you asked your congregation to pray for Trump, and I did anybody just like walk out, or?
No, but they came and talked to me during coffee hour, and it's like, I really don't want to do that. I said, well, that's your choice. I'm simply offering you a way to approach the current reality, which we're not happy with, but it seems to be before us. And if you let it chew yourself up for 4 years, it's not going to matter in Washington, and you're just going to feel bad. So
exactly.
Let's no. But man, it was a hard sell.
One way I've tried to approach that is, and this goes to the spiritual principle that underlies it, without naming anybody in particular. I
Mm.
would talk about Jesus telling us to love our enemies,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mhm.
would talk about forgiveness. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I would, in fact,
Mhm.
like especially in Black Lives Matter movement, I would talk about forgiveness. Because there's so much animosity towards historical figures who were simply operating in the mind of their day and in the culture of their day, and
Yep.
and now they're being judged by a very different consciousness and mindset.
Right. Right.
So there's a good opportunity to talk about forgiveness, and you can talk about forgiveness in ways that don't even if you're tricky with it, if you're good at it, you can talk about it without them catching on to what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what you're doing, and this speaks to being pure in heart.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're trying to make the peace, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have an agenda. Like if your agenda is to sway somebody's thinking towards the right or the left, politically speaking, then you're not being pure in heart, because you're giving in order to get, right? You're trying to manipulate somebody. And I think that, I think if anything, that's what Jesus is talking about when he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In other words, they're going to see the whole picture. They're going to see the universality of the issue. But if you've got something in mind, if you're trying to steer somebody in a secular way or a sectarian way, then you're just trying to manipulate them.
Yeah. It's why we do the blessing on the Washington, D.C. On Monday night, on Sunday nights in our meditation. And the idea is
Right.
just to
Right.
bring light to the
Yeah.
whole place,
Right.
and let everything fall as it may, and help the people who are running our country to, quote, see the light and live in the light.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that, Margot,
Yes.
there is a problem with it. It reminds me of when the disciples went into a certain city and they tried to preach, and the people just kicked them out. And they came back to Jesus and they said, should we call down fire upon them? And Jesus said, look, you're really not getting it. You've lost the plot here.
He was saying, wipe your feet. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, but this other incident was really like that. They weren't willing to listen to us. So let's just wipe them off the face of the earth. So if you tell people
that's not what we're doing.
I know it's not. I
mean, you would like to make this dramatic, but the reality is it's bringing light and life and love into a place that's filled with animosity.
Yeah, but you're gonna invariably, you'll get somebody who's doing that in order to burn them out.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
it's our little meditation group. I think we've got our heads screwed on.
Yes, right.
We're not having any of that tricky dicky stuff.
Tricky.
That's the way. Tricky dicky.
So it's like Polly, it's like what you were saying when you were discovering that people weren't hearing what you were saying at all.
At all, right.
And
right,
I've
right.
discovered, like, if I say, you have to stand by the truth, and the Democrat will say, yeah,
My truth.
my truth, and the Republican will say, yeah,
My truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they don't get what you're saying at all, not at all.
Which is why we're not going there and arguing with anyone. Which
Right.
is why
Right.
Right.
we're soaking them in the light, and that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it keeps us on our toes too, because it keeps us out of that craziness, because
Yeah.
these issues are designed to make us crazy. We have to remember that saying, divide and conquer.
Mhm.
And
Because both sides will draw you in.
oh yeah,
I mean, they both want you to listen. They both want you to agree.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you can see that bigger picture,
Yeah.
you realize that our best contribution can be to bring down the level of the discourse so that eventually we can actually talk to
Interact.
each other again. That's the
Right.
worst part of what's happening, is this, like your phone
Yeah.
call that was just so dividing.
We're also dealing with a media that, blood makes news.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's
So, and the news isn't so great anymore anyway, but
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
so it exacerbates.
We got to get back to being able to have rational civil discourse.
The problem is that we forget that we're people of God, right? And that
right.
the words of our mouth need to reflect that. We're not
Right.
politicians.
Right.
So, and we're not partisans. And in fact, we, in the way that Catholic clergy dress all in black, or used to dress all in black, that was a symbol for that. It was a symbol for renunciation. Of course, nobody has lived up to this, right? I mean, but that's what the symbol is. It's the same reason why we wear white when we go into the sanctuary, because it's purity of heart, purity of mind. But in the world, we would wear all black, but we would have white right here at the throat chakra, meaning that our speech is pure and it's uncorrupted by sectarian or partisan speech. So, and this goes to, this matter of commitment, and also what are you willing to give up? Because if you get on that partisan level of conversation, the main purpose of it is to be right. It's not about negotiation anymore. It's just to be right. So we have to be willing to give that up. We have to be willing to give up the privilege or the ego satisfaction of being right on that level, and constantly speak to a higher level in the person. So, and these things, like Jesus was saying, just in a verse or two after this particular one, he's saying, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, then it's good for nothing, and you just throw it away. And I believe that's what he's referring to here, that the salt is that commodity, that thing that was very valuable in the ancient world, that it's the thing that made it not only made food taste better, but it preserved the food. It was the primary way of preserving meat. And so what's the meat? In St. Paul talks about, the meat. Some people aren't ready for the meat. They have to be fed milk, depending on the level of their spiritual development. So we are the custodians and the preservers of the meat, of the real substantial spiritual teachings that actually move a person's soul closer to God realization. So we have to be very careful that we are not only do that, but we're willing to do that we're willing to put aside these corrupting influences and speak continually at a higher level, and not go there, and find ways to speak to the inner person and not to their political ear.
What it sounded like, though, for Renee in her conversation is that she's being asked to make an opinion, and she's saying, I'm not making an opinion, and
Right.
I don't want to. Let's talk about these books that I got. So that's very hard when your friends corner you on that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because if your friend's a Democrat and they ask you who you're going to vote for and you say, I'm not telling, they say, oh,
well,
that's obvious.
That's obvious.
And the same if you're Republican and you say the same thing, it just doesn't fly. So,
Yeah.
so Renee, I would say again that, you would have to you know, in the order we had this set of writings, and there was a passage, it's called the Book of Activity, and there was a passage in it that really stuck with me, and it was reverence the reverences of others. If you do that, then you don't have to agree with them. You just have to let them know that you see how important it is to them, and you can affirm that to them. You know, I see that this means a lot to you, and I agree, it is something that you should care about, and you affirm them in that, and then that just diffuses it. You see, and then it leaves the door open for the possibility of having a civil dialogue with them, because people just want to know that you hear them and that you appreciate how important it is to them. So, and that to me is part of loving your enemy, right? Even if you really strongly disagree with them on a very important point, you can respect that it's important to them, that their viewpoint, their worldview is something that they're highly invested in, and you can just acknowledge that. It's not easy,
No.
but it's something we have to do. We have to do it.
It reminded me of when we were talking the other day about having to let go of things in our lives, and we talked about letting go of just ideas and material things, and sometimes we have to let go of family or friends, or you know, and that's what kind of it reminded me of, because it gets harder and harder to have relationships with some people, and so that was my thinking on it. I thought, well, maybe this is something that I need to let go of, trying to make this a relationship that works or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of Catholic friends who we talk all the time, and we respect each other, and I don't have this issue with them, and they don't have issues with me. You know, it's just a few people, like 2 or 3 people that are very, like you said, they're very, this means a lot to them. This, you know, these issues mean a lot. And so they get agitated really easy, you know, and they get very emotional.
Yeah.
And they start at that level, you know, like some people, you start in a conversation at 0 and work up to 10. They're usually real
They're at
close
9.5 when you pick the phone up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You start out, you're like, uh-oh, you know, just kind of, okay, maybe this is a bad time to call.
In today's world, we've come into a period of spiritual vacuity, where people feel like their lives are really empty and meaningless, that they are trying as hard as they can to make a living, and it doesn't seem to get them anywhere. The world itself seems to be falling apart in every dimension, and so it makes an individual feel meaningless, like their life doesn't matter. And so if something comes along that they can latch onto, an issue that they have even slightest amount of feeling for, it's like a bandwagon that has direction and purpose, and they will jump on it. And so when you're arguing these issues with them, it's not the issue that you're arguing or that they're arguing. They're arguing for the very meaning of their life, that this is something that has finally given them meaning and direction. And so that's what they're defending. So it helps to understand that, because then you can have a little compassion on them or for them, and maybe find ways to affirm them as a person, you know, because that's what they're missing. If they need something like that, if they need a bandwagon to be on in order to feel like their lives mean something, they're in bad shape, spiritually speaking, really bad shape, because they don't know themselves. They have no center within themselves. They're looking for something out there to give them legitimacy and validity, So it's really helpful to understand that about these issues. Regardless of the justification or the merits of the cause, it's good to understand that because we're really in a dry stretch, spiritually speaking. We're at a nadir when it comes to spirituality, and so people are dying of thirst, and you can't walk up to them and snatch their water bottle away, because they'll fight you as though their life depends on it, because it does. Their spiritual life depends on it. So it's complicated. It's how to be there for people like that. But the second you enter into that level of discourse with them, you're going to run into a brick wall. But it continually falls upon us the responsibility to stand in the holy place. And when we talk with people and they start going down that road, we have to bring it back to them. How do you feel? How are you doing? How are you doing? And then they've got something, there's a common ground there. They can talk about their frustration but it's making it real, right? Because all of these issues are really, most of them are just conceptual. They're an idea, they're an interpretation of what's happening. And that's really at the basis of the disagreements is a difference in perspective and interpretation. So you just can't enter in at that level. You have to make it real. And the only way we can make it real is to talk about God and to see the God in them and to appreciate that and to just love them, right? It's to love them regardless of what they're manifesting. Love is the channel through which a blessing can come. It's like it says in the lesson on love, love of itself has no power, but it's the source of power because it's connection, right? Love is connection. So you have to find a way to connect with people, and just a little bit of that will produce a tremendous amount of healing.
I don't know if this is the proper word but there's really a sense of maturity in what you're talking about. And, a sense of knowing where you come from and being able to help others, because sometimes you go up and down, every day there's things that you go and, you park your car right in the middle of the aisle, don't you think there are people around you, you make me say, excuse you. And, so some things are frustrating, but the sense is, we're here to love that person because they need so much attention. They put their cart in the middle of the aisle.
Yeah, it's either like they're trying to get attention or they're oblivious, and the reason they're oblivious is because they're disconnected. They're only aware of themselves. So, maybe by crashing your cart into their cart, that would be a way to connect, right? And then you can say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that."
Trying to get yeah.
But that would give you a way to start a conversation, right? And make a connection. It's funny how you hardly talk about anything without immediately entering into the political arena.
Yeah.
So that it always comes back to what we're willing to give up in order to do this work. Because there's nobody here in this conversation that's not interested in doing the work. You all have a calling. We all have a calling. And we've got to be true to that, because we're going to answer for that if we're not, right? So we want to, and who knows, every time we veer off into these political areas, we are abandoning the very reason why we're here. We're falling asleep, and we're falling asleep at the wheel. And we're supposed to be the bus driver, you know? So we want to stay awake, and the only way to stay awake is by avoiding, don't drive into a ditch. Exactly.
One of the things that I just experienced recently was just listening to people and just like being like, don't react, don't say anything, just let them express where they're at and what they're feeling and what, you know, and why. And it's a very good lesson for me to not say anything, not react, and just say, so why do you, you know, what do you feel? You know, why do you feel this way? And just say, oh, okay, and not say anything back to it. And to me, that feels very loving because it's letting someone express where they're at, where they're coming from, and why, without one-upping them or debating with them about, you know, just like, oh, okay. And then, okay, so they get done, you know, expressing their feelings, and then you can go into other topics and stuff. But I'm talking specifically about like my nephews and stuff, and just saying, why do you feel that way? You know, and it instead of debating with them, like, that's ridiculous. Why do you feel that? You know, because of course we all have our opinions, but not to give my opinion, but to just be the ears and listen, you know?
Yeah. Well, the best thing you can offer anyone is your example. And if you can keep your cool and equanimity, if you can stay peaceful in the face of that kind of hysteria, then
It's not easy.
yeah, you're going to be noticed. You'll be noticed.
You got to pinch yourself and just like,
And don't be surprised if it, you know, you might think that would endear people to you, but no. You know, it will. Some will see it and say, I want what you have, but others will look at you and they will persecute you. You know, they will condemn you and say you're not taking sides when you should. You know, that kind of thing. So again, Jesus is telling us here, you know, do you have what it takes? You know, remember the parable where he said a guy went to build a tower, but then ran out of money and all of his friends made fun of him? So don't start down this path unless you're willing to pay for it, unless you've got what it takes. And that's what, you know, for a master teacher, that's his first thing. It's remember, for those of you who've seen the Robert Gilbert Rosicrucian video, he said the first thing a teacher looks for, and he was referring specifically to Rudolf Steiner, he said they look for stability. Are they stable in their thinking? Are they stable in their emotions? And are they stable in their actions? And if they're not, nothing you can give them will help. In fact, it would be harmful to give somebody like that anything more than to help them stabilize. So that's like our vetting process. That's what Jesus is doing here. He's vetting these people. You know, even in politics and like, especially in labor disputes, anybody who tries to reconcile the two opposing parties is oftentimes looked upon as a traitor. You know,
yeah.
So, you know, he's saying, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And are you willing to risk that, you know? And can you become skillful enough to be a peacemaker without unnecessarily drawing that kind of attention to yourself? You know what I mean? It's our work in when things are volatile, we have to be very skillful in how we approach people. Otherwise, we not only not going to help them, they will turn and bite us, right? So we have to be very careful what we give them and how we give it to them. But in the final analysis, the best thing we can do is to live what we believe and what we know.
Mhm.
We have to maintain that connection with God, regardless of the situation we find ourselves in. And that takes an enormous amount of fortitude, character, and resolve and commitment. And you know, we have to make that commitment at the outset, and decide, you know, are we willing to put in the time? You know, that's a big one for, especially these days when we don't have a monastery where we are under the direct supervision of a teacher and you know, support system like that. We have to do this on our own. So we have to make the commitment of our time as well, where we're going to say, I am going to meditate, you know, in the morning and in the evening for X amount of time. And I'm going to take time to study, and I'm going to take time to serve people.